I've been hauling freight across America's highways for nearly 3 decades now. The name's Donald Wildford, though most folks at the truck stops just call me Big Don. At 52, I'm carrying more weight around my middle than I'd like to admit. But that's what happens when your dining options are limited to whatever's available at the next rest area. My trademark red cap from the Chicago Bulls' '93 championship season and my bushy mustache have become so much a part of me that my own reflection would look like a stranger without them. This particular Tuesday started like any other. I woke up in the sleeper cab of my Kenworth W900, parked at a truck stop just outside Tulsa. The digital clock on my dashboard read 4:15 a.m., early but normal in my line of work. I reached for the small medallion of St. Christopher hanging from my rearview mirror, pressed it to my lips, and whispered my usual morning prayer. Keep me safe on these roads today, patron saint of travelers. Watch over me and get me home in one piece. Some of the younger drivers laugh at my devotion, but 28 years on the road without a major accident is no coincidence. St. Christopher has been looking out for me, and I'm not about to stop showing my gratitude. I fired up the engine, letting it warm, while I tuned the radio to catch the pre-game analysis for tonight's Bulls game against the Lakers. Basketball has been my salvation during those long, lonely stretches of highway. The commentators' voices keep me company, the play-by-play narration creating a movie in my mind as I picture each drive to the basket, each three-pointer arcing through the air. Looks like Donovan Mitchell might be sitting this one out with that ankle injury, the radio announcer said as I pulled onto I-44, which would eventually connect me to the historic Route 66 portions I preferred to drive when time allowed. My load today was straightforward. Industrial refrigeration equipment headed for a new distribution center in Albuquerque. The dispatcher had given me 3 days, but I figured I could make it in 2 if the weather held and traffic cooperated. The GPS showed clear sailing, though there was mention of possible wildlife activity near the Texas Panhandle section of the route. As the sun began to rise, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and pink, I settled into the rhythm of the road, the familiar vibration of the engine, the gentle rocking of the cab, and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching before me. This was my world, simple, predictable, comfortable. Just me, my rig, the open road, and the voices on the radio talking about zone defense and fast brakes. Little did I know that by sunset, everything about my comfortable, predictable life would be changed forever. The day progressed without incident as I crossed from Oklahoma into the Texas Panhandle. The landscape changed from rolling green hills to the flat, expansive plains that always reminded me of an ocean of earth. The sky out here seems bigger somehow, stretching from horizon to horizon with barely a tree to interrupt the view. I stopped for lunch at a small diner in Shamrock, Texas, one of those authentic Route 66 establishments that somehow survived the interstate era. The waitress, Betty, knew me by name and had my usual cheeseburger and chocolate shake ready before I'd even settled into my regular booth. "Heading west again, Don?" she asked, refilling my water glass. "Albuquerque this time," I replied, checking my phone for updates on the Bulls' starting lineup for tonight's game. "Should be a straight shot if nothing crazy happens." Betty's expression changed slightly. "Well, you be careful out there. Highway Patrol came in earlier talking about increased animal crossings, something about the drought pushing them closer to the roads looking for water." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Wildlife warnings were common, and in nearly 30 years of driving, I'd had plenty of close calls, but always managed to avoid anything serious. Back on the road, the afternoon sun beat down on my windshield as I tuned into the pre-game show. The commentators were debating whether the Bulls' new defensive strategy would hold up against the Lakers' offensive powerhouse. I was so engrossed in their analysis that I almost missed the call from my dispatcher. "Don, we've got a situation," Maria's voice crackled through my Bluetooth. "Client in Albuquerque is facing a production shutdown if that equipment doesn't arrive by tomorrow morning. Any chance you can push through the night?" I felt my stomach tighten. I'd been planning to stop in Tucumcari for the night, get a proper meal and some real sleep. Pushing through meant driving well past my usual hours, navigating some of the more desolate stretches of Route 66 in the dark. "That's cutting it close, Maria," I said, calculating the hours in my head. "I'd be pushing the legal drive time limits." "I know it's asking a lot, Don, but this client is huge. They're promising additional contracts if we can bail them out of this jam. The company's authorized a significant bonus if you can make it happen." I glanced at St. Christopher, swinging gently from my mirror. The smart play was to stick to my original plan. But the mention of a bonus had my attention. My youngest daughter's college tuition was coming due, and every extra dollar helped. "All right," I finally said. "I'll make it happen, but you're buying me dinner next time I'm back at headquarters." As I hung up, a strange feeling settled over me, a mixture of determination and unease. The sun was already beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the highway. Ahead of me lay some of the most isolated stretches of Route 66, areas where cell service was spotty at best, and the distance between towns could be measured in hours rather than miles. Little did I know that this decision, this acceptance of the challenge, would be the first step down a path that would test not just my driving skills, but my very will to survive. As the Texas sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the highway, doubt crept into my mind like the approaching darkness. I pulled into a rest area just outside Adrian, Texas, roughly the halfway point of Route 66, and parked my rig in the nearly empty lot. Sitting in my idling cab, I stared at my logbook and the rapidly diminishing hours I had left before I'd be legally required to rest. The Bulls game would be starting in an hour, and I'd been looking forward to watching at least the first half at the motel in Tucumcari, where I usually stayed. The owner, Raj, always saved me room 12 and let me use the lobby TV when games were on. I pulled out my phone and pulled up Maria's number, my thumb hovering over the call button. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to tell her I couldn't make it, that pushing through the night on this particular stretch was asking for trouble. "St. Christopher, what do you think?" I muttered, fingering the medallion. "Is this bonus worth the risk?" As if in answer, my phone rang, my daughter Kelly's face lighting up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," I answered, trying to sound more awake than I felt. "Dad, just checking in. Are you still coming to my graduation next month?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I assured her. "Your old man will be sitting front row, embarrassing you by cheering too loud." She laughed, the sound warming me more than the cab's heater. "And, did you get my email about the tuition payment?" There it was, the reason I was even considering this night drive. "I'm working on it, honey. In fact, I might have some good news on that front soon." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon. The vast Texas sky transformed from orange to deep purple, stars beginning to appear like distant truck headlights. I reached for my thermos and poured the last of my coffee, now lukewarm, into my cup. The radio announcer's voice filled the cab as the Bulls' starting lineup was introduced. I should be settling in at Raj's place right now, not contemplating a night drive through some of the most desolate stretches of highway in America. "This is crazy," I muttered to myself. "I'm too old to be pushing like this." I picked up my phone again and dialed Maria's number, determined to tell her I'd deliver tomorrow afternoon as originally planned. But as the phone rang, I glanced at the photo taped to my dashboard. Kelly in her cap and gown from high school graduation, her smile full of promise and potential. When Maria answered, the words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "Just checking in to confirm that bonus amount," I said, instead of the refusal I'd planned. "Because I'm going to earn every penny of it tonight." As I pulled back onto Route 66, the last light fading from the sky, a coyote howled somewhere in the distance. In the old stories, that was never a good sign, but I pushed the thought away, cranked up the radio volume as the game began, and focused on the road stretching endlessly before me. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. The night had fully settled by the time I crossed into New Mexico, the darkness so complete, it felt like driving through space itself. The Bulls were down by 12 at halftime, which wasn't helping my mood. I switched to an old country station to keep me company instead. About 20 miles east of Tucumcari, I spotted a small roadside stand that shouldn't have been open this late. A single light illuminated a weathered wooden structure, and beside it, an ancient pickup truck that looked like it had been assembled from parts of 3 different vehicles. Curiosity got the better of me. That, and the need to stretch my legs and splash some cold water on my face. I pulled over, the air brakes hissing as my rig came to a stop. As I approached the stand, I could see it was selling local crafts, dream catchers, turquoise jewelry, and hand-woven blankets. Behind a small counter sat an elderly Native American man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes sharp and alert despite his apparent age. "Kind of late to be open for business, isn't it?" I asked, scanning the handmade items. The old man smiled, revealing a perfect set of white teeth that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. "I'm open when I need to be open," he replied cryptically. "You look like you could use some coffee, driver." Before I could respond, he was pouring dark liquid from a battered pot into a ceramic mug. The rich aroma hit me immediately. This wasn't the watered-down truck stop coffee I was used to. "Thanks," I said, accepting the mug. The coffee was strong and surprisingly good. "How much do I owe you?" The old man waved away my offer of payment. "Information is the only currency I need tonight." "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" I found myself telling him about the rush delivery, the bonus, my daughter's tuition. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if he'd heard similar stories 1,000 times before. When I finished, he studied me for a long moment. "The road ahead is dangerous tonight," he finally said. "More dangerous than usual." I chuckled nervously. "I've been driving Route 66 for decades. I know every curve and dip between here and California." "Not tonight, you don't," he replied, his expression serious. "Tonight the road has different plans." He reached beneath the counter and pulled out what looked like a small leather pouch on a cord. "Wear this. It contains sage, cedar, and a prayer for protection." I started to refuse. I already had St. Christopher watching over me, but something in the old man's eyes stopped me. Instead, I found myself accepting the pouch and slipping it over my head, tucking it beneath my shirt, where it rested next to my heart. "3 things you must remember tonight," the old man said, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "Stay alert for the unexpected. Trust your instincts, not your eyes. And when the moment comes, and it will come, choose life, even if it wears a face you don't recognize." I nodded, not fully understanding, but somehow knowing these words were important. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "One more thing, Donald Wildford. Sometimes we must lose our way to find our path." I froze, turning slowly back toward him. "I never told you my name." The old man just smiled and gestured toward the road. "The night grows no younger. Your destiny awaits." The old man's words echoed in my mind as I merged back onto Route 66. The leather pouch felt warm against my chest, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I reached up and touched St. Christopher with one hand, the pouch with the other, feeling strangely protected by both. "Well, I've got all bases covered now," I muttered to myself. "Christian saint and Native American magic. Something's bound to work." The radio signal began to fade as I drove deeper into the New Mexico night. Static replaced the country music, and after fiddling with the dial for a few minutes, I gave up and switched it off. The silence was immediate and heavy, broken only by the hum of my engine and the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt. Without the distraction of music or basketball commentary, I became acutely aware of my surroundings. The moon had risen, nearly full, casting an eerie silver light across the landscape. The desert seemed to glow under its influence, the shadows of cacti and rock formations stretching like dark fingers across the sand. My headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating the road just far enough ahead to navigate, but not far enough to provide any real comfort. Beyond that circle of light lay mystery. Miles of empty desert and the occasional abandoned building, remnants of Route 66's heyday when these small towns thrived on the steady stream of westbound travelers. The dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. when I passed the "Welcome to Tucumcari" sign. I felt a pang of regret as I drove past the exit that would have taken me to Raj's motel. Right now, I could be stretched out on a real bed, watching the end of the Bulls game, instead of pushing through this unsettling night. Just outside of town, the road narrowed and began to wind through more rugged terrain. The flatness of the Texas Panhandle was behind me now, replaced by the rolling foothills that would eventually give way to mountains. My GPS indicated I was entering a stretch with no services for the next 70 miles. No gas stations, no rest areas, not even a roadside emergency phone. I was truly on my own now. As if sensing my isolation, my phone chimed with a message notification. I glanced down to see a text from Maria. "Weather alert for your route. Possible dust storm near Albuquerque. Be careful." Great. Just what I needed. I typed a quick "thanks for the heads-up" response, then tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. As I looked back up at the road, my heart nearly stopped. Standing directly in my path, frozen in my headlights, was a massive elk. Its antlers spread wide like gnarled branches, its eyes reflecting my lights back at me like twin moons. There was no time to brake. At 65 miles per hour, my fully loaded rig would never stop in time. Pure instinct took over. I jerked the wheel to the right, aiming for the narrow shoulder, hoping to miss the animal without overturning my trailer. The elk bounded away at the last second, but my evasive maneuver had put me on a collision course with the guardrail. I felt the front right tire leave the pavement, the steering wheel suddenly loose in my hands. The world slowed down as my rig began to tilt, the weight of my cargo pulling me toward the edge of a ravine I hadn't even realized was there. In that moment, I understood what the old man meant about the road having different plans tonight. I was no longer in control, if I ever had been. As my truck tipped past the point of no return, I closed my eyes and whispered, "St. Christopher, don't fail me now." The last thing I remember was the sickening sensation of falling, the screech of metal against rock, and the strange, fleeting thought that I wouldn't get to see how the Bulls' game ended. Pain was my first conscious sensation, sharp, insistent pain radiating from my left leg and chest. The second was disorientation. I was upside down, suspended by my seatbelt, blood rushing to my head. The cab of my truck was crushed inward on the driver's side, moonlight streaming through the shattered windshield. I tried to move and immediately regretted it as fresh waves of pain washed over me. Something was definitely broken, probably several somethings. The smell of diesel fuel filled my nostrils, and somewhere behind me I could hear a steady dripping sound. "Hello?" I called out weakly, though I knew it was futile. There was no one out here, no one to hear me. My phone was nowhere in sight, probably thrown from the cab during the rollover. Panic began to set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was trapped in a wrecked truck at the bottom of a ravine, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. The next vehicle might not come along for hours, and even if it did, they might not notice the guardrail damage in the dark. I could die here. The thought was so stark, so terrifying in its simplicity, that it actually calmed me. If these were potentially my last hours, I didn't want to spend them in panic. I closed my eyes and tried to control my breathing, to assess my situation more rationally. The medallion of St. Christopher had come loose and was dangling in front of my face. Beside it hung the leather pouch the old man had given me. Both had stayed with me through the crash. I chose to take that as a good sign. "Okay, Don," I muttered to myself. "First things first, get out of this seatbelt without breaking your neck." It took nearly 20 minutes of painful maneuvering, but I managed to brace myself against the crushed dashboard and release the belt. I collapsed onto what had been the roof of the cab, crying out as my injured leg took the brunt of the fall. After catching my breath, I began to take stock of my injuries. My left leg was definitely broken. I could see the unnatural angle even in the dim light. Several ribs felt cracked, and a deep gash on my forehead was bleeding steadily, the blood warm and sticky as it ran down my face and into my beard. I needed to get out of the truck. The smell of diesel was growing stronger, and though I couldn't see any flames, I knew that could change in an instant. Using my arms and right leg, I dragged myself toward the passenger side door, which was less damaged than the driver's side. The door was jammed, but the window was completely gone. If I could just pull myself through. A sudden noise outside the truck froze me in place. Something was moving around out there, something large enough to make the gravel crunch. My first hopeful thought was that someone had seen the accident and come to help. But as the footsteps circled the truck, a low growl dispelled that notion. Coyotes, or worse, a mountain lion, drawn by the smell of blood and trapped prey. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My flashlight had survived the crash, wedged under the passenger seat. I grabbed it, its solid metal weight somewhat reassuring in my hand. The footsteps stopped directly outside the window I'd been planning to escape through. I raised the flashlight, prepared to fight for my life against whatever predator had found me. When I clicked the light on, I found myself staring not into the eyes of a wild animal, but into the dark, intense gaze of a woman. Her skin was the color of burnished copper, her black hair wild and adorned with small silver ornaments that caught the flashlight beam. She wore layers of colorful, mismatched clothing, and around her neck hung dozens of necklaces and amulets. She didn't flinch from the sudden light, didn't speak, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between curiosity and calculation. "Help me," I managed to croak. "Please." She tilted her head slightly, as if considering my request. Then, without a word, she reached through the window, her hand extended toward me. I hesitated for just a moment before grasping the woman's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her palm calloused and warm against mine. With a strength that belied her slender frame, she helped pull me through the shattered window, careful to avoid the jagged edges of glass still clinging to the frame. The pain when I fully emerged was blinding. My broken leg dragged uselessly behind me, and each breath sent daggers through my ribs. I collapsed onto the rocky ground, the world spinning around me. "Thank you," I gasped, looking up at my rescuer. She stood over me, silhouetted against the night sky, the moonlight creating a silver halo around her wild hair. Now that I was outside, I could see her more clearly. She was younger than I'd first thought, maybe in her 30s, with features that suggested Roma heritage. A gypsy out here in the New Mexico desert. It made no sense. "You are lucky," she finally spoke, her accent thick but her English clear. "Few travel this road at night. Fewer still would stop for a wreck in this ravine." Did you see it happen?" I asked, trying to sit up and immediately regretting it. She shook her head. "I heard it. The sound of metal breaking carries far in the desert night." She knelt beside me, her dark eyes examining my injuries with clinical detachment. "You cannot walk. The nearest town is many miles. This is a problem." "My phone," I said, suddenly remembering. "If we can find my phone, we can call for help." The woman made a dismissive gesture. "No signal here. I already checked my own." She stood again, seeming to come to a decision. "I have a camp nearby. I can treat your wounds there, give you shelter until morning." I looked back at my destroyed truck, then up at the steep ravine wall that separated us from the highway. Even if someone drove by, they'd never see us down here in the darkness. And the woman was right. I couldn't walk, couldn't climb, couldn't do anything but accept her help or die here alone. "I don't have much choice, do I?" I said, attempting a weak smile. Without answering, she disappeared into the darkness, returning moments later with a crude travois, two long branches with what looked like a blanket stretched between them. She must have had it ready, must have known I'd need it. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. "This will hurt," she warned as she helped me onto the makeshift stretcher. She wasn't wrong. By the time I was positioned, sweat was pouring down my face despite the cool night air, and I was biting my lip so hard I tasted blood. She tied the ends of the branches around her waist and began to pull, dragging me across the desert floor. Each bump and dip sent fresh waves of agony through my broken body, but I bit back my cries. This strange woman was my only hope of survival, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. We traveled in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The desert landscape looked alien in the moonlight. Twisted juniper trees casting grotesque shadows, rock formations looming like ancient sentinels, the occasional scurrying of small nocturnal creatures, the only sign of life besides ourselves. Finally, we approached what looked like a small encampment nestled against a rock face. A battered old RV that had clearly been stationary for years served as its centerpiece, surrounded by a collection of tarps and makeshift structures. Solar panels were mounted on the RV's roof, and a small wind turbine spun lazily nearby. "Home," the woman said simply, pulling me toward the largest tent. As we drew closer, I could see the camp was more elaborate than it first appeared. Garden beds contained what looked like herbs and vegetables, carefully tended despite the harsh environment. Rainwater collection systems were strategically placed. This wasn't a temporary stopping place. This was a permanent dwelling, deliberately hidden from the highway and any passing travelers. "Who are you?" I asked, as she maneuvered me through the tent opening. "What's your name?" She paused, regarding me with those intense, dark eyes. "You may call me Esmeralda," she finally said, though something in her tone suggested this might not be her real name. "And you are in my world now, Donald Wildford. Here I make the rules." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. How did she know my name? I hadn't told her, and my driver's license was in my wallet, still in the truck. Before I could ask, pain and exhaustion finally overwhelmed me, and darkness claimed my consciousness. I awoke to the smell of herbs and wood smoke. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then the pain hit me, duller now but still present, and it all came flooding back. The crash, the ravine, the mysterious woman who had saved me. Esmeralda. I was lying on a pallet inside the tent, my legs splintered with what looked like pieces of driftwood and strips of cloth. My chest was tightly wrapped, supporting my injured ribs, and a bandage covered the gash on my forehead. Someone had removed my bloodied clothes. I was wearing an oversized t-shirt and loose cotton pants that definitely weren't mine. Sunlight filtered through the canvas, suggesting it was mid-morning. I'd been unconscious for hours. Panic surged through me as I remembered my delivery deadline. I was supposed to be in Albuquerque by now. Maria would be wondering where I was, maybe already organizing a search. I tried to sit up, but a firm hand on my shoulder pushed me back down. "Be still," Esmeralda commanded, appearing beside me as if from nowhere. "Your body needs rest to heal." "I need to contact my company," I protested weakly. "They'll be looking for me." "Later," she said dismissively. "First, you must drink this." She held a clay cup to my lips, filled with a steaming liquid that smelled bitter and earthy. I turned my head away. "What is that?" "Medicine," she replied simply. "For pain and infection. Your leg is badly broken, and the wound on your head is deep. Without proper treatment, fever will come by nightfall." I eyed the concoction suspiciously. "No offense, but I'd prefer actual medicine, antibiotics, painkillers. The kind you get at a pharmacy." A flash of irritation crossed her face. "You think because it does not come in a plastic bottle with a label, it is not medicine. My grandmother was healing broken bones before your doctors learned to wash their hands." She pushed the cup toward me again. "Drink or suffer. Your choice." Something about her confidence, or perhaps my desperation, convinced me. I took a sip and nearly gagged at the bitter taste, but I forced myself to drink it all under her watchful gaze. "Good," she nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Now we can talk." "About getting me to a hospital?" I asked, hopefully. Esmeralda sat cross-legged beside my pallet, her colorful skirts pooling around her. "The nearest hospital is in Albuquerque, nearly 100 miles from here. I have no car, and you cannot travel in your condition." "But someone must drive by on the highway," I argued. "You could flag them down, ask for help." She shook her head. "This section of the old Route 66 sees perhaps 3 cars a day, and I do not show myself to strangers." Her expression darkened. "There are reasons I live apart from your world, Donald Wildford." I was about to press further when a wave of dizziness washed over me. Whatever was in that drink was powerful. The pain was already receding, replaced by a floating sensation that wasn't entirely unpleasant. "You drugged me," I accused, my words slightly slurred. "I medicated you," she corrected. "There is a difference." As the herbs took effect, I found myself studying her more closely. In the daylight, Esmeralda was even more striking. High cheekbones, copper skin weathered by sun and wind, those penetrating dark eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. The silver ornaments in her hair caught the light, creating tiny constellations around her face. "How did you know my name?" I finally asked the question that had been bothering me since last night. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "The old man at the roadside stand told me you would come." My blood ran cold despite the warmth of the tent. "What old man?" "The one who gave you the medicine pouch," she said, gesturing to the leather bag that someone had placed beside my makeshift bed. "My grandfather." The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. The old man had known I would crash, had known I would need help, had sent his granddaughter to find me. "That's impossible," I whispered. Esmeralda's smile widened. "Many impossible things happen on this old road, Donald Wildford. You're about to learn that the world is much stranger than your trucks and highways and basketball games would have you believe." As the herbal concoction pulled me back toward unconsciousness, one thought burned in my mind. I was completely at the mercy of a woman who believed in impossibilities, hidden away in a desert camp where no one would think to look for me. And the most terrifying part? I was beginning to believe her. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain, fever, and strange dreams. Esmeralda tended to me constantly, changing my bandages, forcing bitter medicines down my throat, and speaking to me in a mixture of English and what I assumed was Romani when the fever made me delirious. I caught glimpses of her life in my more lucid moments. The careful way she tended her desert garden at dawn, the small shrine in the corner of the tent where she burned herbs and whispered prayers, the ancient books she read by lamplight. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke with a clear head for the first time since the accident. The pain in my leg had subsided to a dull throb, and breathing no longer felt like being stabbed with each inhale. Sunlight streamed through the open tent flap, and I could hear birds singing outside. I managed to prop myself up on my elbows just as Esmeralda entered, carrying a wooden bowl of what smelled like stew. "You look better," she observed, kneeling beside me. "The fever has broken." "Thanks to you," I acknowledged. Despite my initial suspicions, I couldn't deny that her treatments had worked. "I'd probably be dead if you hadn't found me." She nodded, accepting my gratitude without false modesty. "You were stubborn. Most men would have surrendered to the fever." She handed me the bowl and a crude wooden spoon. "Eat. You need strength." The stew was surprisingly good. Rabbit, I thought, with desert herbs and wild onions. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first spoonful hit my tongue. As I ate, Esmeralda sat quietly, watching me with those penetrating eyes. "My company," I said between bites. "They must be looking for me by now." "They are," she confirmed. "Yesterday, a helicopter flew over the highway, and there have been vehicles stopping at the place where your truck went off the road." Hope surged through me. "We need to signal them, light a fire, something to get their attention." Esmeralda's expression remained impassive. If I wanted them to find you, I would have left you in your truck. The bowl nearly slipped from my hands. What? Why would you keep me hidden? She took the empty bowl from me and set it aside. Because you are not ready to return. Not ready, I sputtered. Look, I appreciate everything you've done, but I have a life to get back to. A job. A family. And what kind of life is it? She asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Endless highways, lonely nights, seeing your daughter only between halls. Is this living, Donald Wildford? Her words hit me like a physical blow. How did she know about Kelly? I'd never mentioned my daughter. During your fever you spoke of many things, she said, as if reading my thoughts. Your daughter, your failed marriages, your prayers to a saint who watches over travelers but never leads them home. I looked away, uncomfortable with how accurately she had assessed my life. It's the life I chose. Is it, she challenged, or is it the life that chose you? The easy path, the expected path. Anger flared within me. There's nothing easy about driving 18 hours a day, missing your kids' birthdays, watching your marriages fall apart because you're never home. Yet you continue, she observed calmly. Year after year, the road becomes the excuse. I cannot be there because I am here. And being here becomes your purpose, your identity. I wanted to argue, to defend the choices I'd made, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, I knew she was right. The road had become my escape, my way of avoiding the messier parts of life, relationships, responsibilities, putting down roots. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the gentle flapping of the tent canvas in the breeze. Why are you doing this? I finally asked. Why did you save me just to lecture me about my life choices? Esmeralda's expression softened slightly. My grandfather did not send me to save you from the crash, Donald Wildford. He sent me to save you from yourself. She reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out something that made my heart skip a beat. My phone. I found this near your truck on the second day, she explained. There is no signal here, but I have a solar charger. It works now. I reached for it eagerly, but she held it just beyond my grasp. Before I give this to you, you must understand something. Once you call for help, our time together ends. You will return to your world of highways and schedules and loneliness. Is that truly what you want? I stared at her, bewildered. What's the alternative? Stay here forever in your hidden camp? Become a desert hermit? She laughed then, a rich, melodic sound that transformed her serious face. No, Donald Wildford. The alternative is to return to your world as a different man. One who has died and been reborn. One who sees the road not as an escape, but as a path that always leads home. She placed the phone in my hand, curling my fingers around it. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. As I looked down at the device, my connection to my old life, I realized that for the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was truly considering what I wanted, not just what was expected of me. And that, I understood, was the real gift Esmeralda had given me. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling its weight, not just the physical heft of metal and glass, but the weight of decision it represented. With one call, I could summon rescue, return to my life, my job, my familiar routines. Yet something held me back. Before I make this call, I said slowly, I want to understand. Your grandfather knew I would crash. He gave me that pouch, told me the road had different plans. How could he have known? Esmeralda settled herself more comfortably, arranging her colorful skirts around her. My people have traveled the roads of this country for generations. Long before your Route 66 existed, before the Spanish came, before even the native tribes claimed this land as their own. We are watchers of the in-between places, the crossroads where fates intersect. She gestured toward the leather pouch beside my bed. My grandfather saw your path diverging. One road led to death in that ravine. Another led here to healing, not just of your body, but of your spirit. You're saying he saw the future? I asked skeptically. He saw possibilities, she corrected. As we all do, if we learn to look. Have you never had a feeling about a certain stretch of road, a premonition to slow down, to take a different route? I thought about the countless times over my driving career when instinct had made me brake just before an unseen hazard or choose a different highway despite my GPS's instructions. I'd always attributed it to experience, to subconscious processing of subtle cues. That's different, I argued. That's just intuition. And what is intuition but the soul's recognition of paths unseen by the eye? She smiled enigmatically. You wear St. Christopher around your neck, pray to him for protection. Is it so hard to believe that other forces might also watch over travelers? I had no answer for that. My Catholic upbringing warred with the rational, practical mindset I'd developed over decades on the road. Yet here I was, alive when I should be dead, being tended by a Romani woman who spoke of diverging fates as casually as I might discuss alternate routes to Albuquerque. I need to call my daughter, I finally said. She must be worried sick. Esmeralda nodded, seemingly satisfied with my decision. Use the phone. There is a place on the ridge above the camp where signal sometimes reaches. I will show you. She helped me to my feet, the first time I'd stood since the accident. My splinted leg couldn't bear weight, but she provided a sturdy walking stick, and with her support I managed to hobble outside the tent. The desert morning was breathtaking, clear blue sky stretching endlessly above, the landscape painted in shades of rust and gold. Esmeralda's camp was larger than I'd imagined, with several small structures clustered around the central RV. A few chickens pecked at the hard ground, and I could see the garden beds I'd glimpsed during my fever dreams, surprisingly lush despite the harsh environment. You've made quite a home here, I observed, as we slowly made our way toward a narrow path leading up the ridge. Home is not a place, she replied. It is a feeling of belonging. I belong to the road, to the journey. This is merely where I rest between wanderings. The climb was difficult with my injured leg, but Esmeralda was patient, supporting me when needed, allowing me to rest when the pain became too intense. By the time we reached the top of the ridge, I was sweating and breathing hard, but filled with a strange sense of accomplishment. There, she pointed to a flat rock overlooking the vast expanse of desert. Stand there and reach toward the sky. Sometimes the signal finds you. I did as instructed, holding my phone up like some modern offering to ancient gods. After a moment, a single bar appeared, weak but present, enough to make a call. I dialed Kelly's number with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to give up when she answered. Dad! Her voice was thick with emotion. Oh my God, Dad, is that really you? It's me, sweetheart, I said, my own voice cracking. I'm alive. What followed was a tearful conversation as I explained that I'd been in an accident but was being cared for. I deliberately kept details vague. Something told me that Esmeralda's existence was not meant to be widely known. I promised Kelly I would call again tomorrow from the same spot with instructions for rescue. When I hung up, I found Esmeralda watching me with an unreadable expression. You did not tell her to send help today, she observed. I shook my head. I think I need one more day here to figure some things out. She nodded, as if this was exactly what she had expected. The journey back is never as simple as retracing your steps. You cannot unknow what you have learned. As we made our slow descent back to the camp, I realized she was right. Whatever happened next, I couldn't go back to being the same Donald Wildford who had driven off that ravine 4 nights ago. That man had died in the crash. Who I would become in his place remained to be seen. That night, as the desert temperature plummeted and stars appeared in breathtaking profusion overhead, Esmeralda built a fire outside her tent. She helped me settle beside it, wrapping a hand-woven blanket around my shoulders against the chill. Tonight is important, she said, feeding small branches into the growing flames. Your last night between worlds. I watched the fire dance, mesmerized by its shifting patterns. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow you return to your life, she replied simply. But first you must decide what parts of that life you wish to reclaim and what parts you will leave behind in the desert. She reached into a pouch at her waist and sprinkled something onto the fire. The flames turned momentarily blue-green and a sweet, pungent aroma filled the air. "What is that?" I asked, the scent making me slightly lightheaded. "Sage, cedar, and something else," she said with a small smile. "Something to help you see clearly." We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a coyote. The stars above seemed to pulse and shimmer, and the boundaries between the firelight and the darkness beyond began to blur. I wasn't frightened by these sensory changes. Instead, I felt a profound sense of clarity emerging, as if layers of mental fog were being burned away. "I've been running," I said suddenly, the realization bubbling up from some deep place within me. "All those miles on the road, and I've been running the whole time." Esmeralda nodded, her face serene in the firelight. "From what?" "From failure," I admitted. "My first marriage ended because I was never home, so I drove more, took longer hauls. When the second marriage failed for the same reason, I just disappeared into the job completely. Told myself I was providing for Kelly, being responsible, but really I was hiding." "And now?" she prompted gently. I stared into the flames, seeing not just fire, but moments from my life. Kelly's graduation, where I'd arrived just in time and left immediately after. Holidays spent in truck stops while my family celebrated without me. Relationships that withered from neglect while I convinced myself I was just doing my job. "I don't want to run anymore," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I want to be present, really present, not just physically there between hauls." "This will require sacrifice," Esmeralda warned. "The road gives freedom but demands loyalty. To change your relationship with it will not be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. She smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed her serious face. "Now you begin to understand why you were brought here. By your grandfather or by St. Christopher?" I asked, fingering the medallion that still hung around my neck. "Does it matter?" she countered. "Faith takes many forms, Donald Wildford. The important thing is not what you believe in, but that you believe in something greater than yourself." She reached forward and took my hand in hers. Her palm was warm against mine, calloused, but gentle. "Tomorrow, when rescue comes, you will begin your new life, but tonight we must complete your rebirth." From beside the fire, she produced a small clay bowl filled with what looked like mud. "This is earth from the place of your crash, mixed with healing herbs and water from my well. I will mark you with it to seal your transformation." Under normal circumstances, I might have refused such a strange ritual. But these were not normal circumstances, and I was no longer the man who would have scoffed at such things. I nodded my consent. Esmeralda dipped her finger into the mixture and drew a symbol on my forehead, over the healing gash. "For clear sight," she murmured. She marked my chest over my heart. "For true feeling." Finally, she touched the mud to my lips. "For honest words." The mixture felt cool against my skin, then warm, then almost electric, as if tiny currents were flowing from the marks into my body. The fire seemed to grow brighter, the stars more brilliant, and for a moment I felt as if I could see connections between everything, the fire, the stars, Esmeralda, myself, all part of some vast, intricate pattern. "Who are you, really?" I whispered, overwhelmed by the sensation. "I am who I need to be, for those who need me," she replied enigmatically. "As you will be, from this day forward." She began to sing then, a low, melodic chant in a language I didn't understand. The sound wrapped around me like the blanket on my shoulders, and I felt myself drifting, not into sleep, but into a state of profound awareness. Every breath seemed significant, every heartbeat a confirmation of life renewed. In that moment, suspended between worlds, I understood what she had meant about dying and being reborn. The Donald Wildford who had driven off that ravine was gone. In his place was a man who had glimpsed something beyond the physical world, who had been healed by more than just herbs and bandages. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with the first hints of pink and gold, Esmeralda's song faded into silence. The fire had burned down to embers, and the magical quality of the night was receding like a tide, leaving behind not emptiness, but fullness. "It is done," she said simply, rising to her feet. "Rest now. When you wake, it will be time for you to go home." As she disappeared into her tent, I realized she hadn't specified which home she meant, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't sure either. But I was certain of one thing: wherever I went from here, I would be carrying this desert night within me for the rest of my life. The rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon just after noon, its distant thrum growing steadily louder as it approached. I sat on the ridge, where I'd made my call to Kelly the day before, my splinted legs stretched out before me, Esmeralda standing silently at my side. I'd woken that morning feeling different, lighter somehow, despite my injuries. We'd shared a simple breakfast of flatbread and honey, speaking little but communicating much through glances and small gestures. There was an understanding between us that transcended words, a connection forged through the strange, transformative days we'd spent together. Now, as the helicopter circled overhead, spotting the bright orange marker Esmeralda had placed on the ridge, I turned to her one last time. "Will I ever see you again?" I asked, having to shout over the growing noise of the rotors. She smiled, that enigmatic smile that had become so familiar. "The road has many crossings, Donald Wildford. Those who are meant to meet will always find their way back to each other." The helicopter touched down about 50 yards away, kicking up a swirl of dust and sand. 2 paramedics jumped out, followed by a search and rescue officer. They ran toward us, medical bags in hand, faces showing relief at finding me alive. "Sir, Donald Wildford?" the officer called as they approached. "We've been searching for days. Are you all right?" "Broken leg, some ribs, but I'll live," I replied, then turned to introduce Esmeralda, only to find empty space where she had been standing seconds before. I looked around in confusion, but she had vanished completely, as if the swirling dust had simply absorbed her. The paramedics were too focused on assessing my injuries to notice my bewilderment. They worked efficiently, transferring me to a proper splint, checking my vitals, asking questions about my accident and subsequent days. "You're one lucky son of a gun," the older paramedic commented as they prepared to move me to the helicopter. "Most people wouldn't survive that crash, let alone the exposure out here. How'd you manage?" I fingered the leather pouch still hanging around my neck alongside St. Christopher. "I had help," I said simply. "Well, your daughter's waiting at the hospital in Albuquerque," the officer informed me. "She hasn't left since she reported you missing. That's one devoted kid you've got." A lump formed in my throat. "Yes," I agreed. "She is." As they lifted me onto a stretcher, I caught a glimpse of something at the edge of my vision, a flash of colorful fabric among the rocks below the ridge. But when I turned my head for a better look, there was nothing there. The flight to Albuquerque took less than an hour. Throughout the journey, I gazed down at the vast desert landscape, trying to memorize its contours, its colors, its emptiness that had somehow filled me. Somewhere down there was Esmeralda's hidden camp, and her grandfather's roadside stand, and the ravine where my old life had ended. At the hospital, Kelly was waiting, just as they'd said. The moment they wheeled me in, she rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Dad!" she cried, carefully embracing me to avoid my injuries. "I thought I'd lost you." "I'm right here, sweetheart," I assured her, holding her as tightly as my bandaged ribs would allow. "And I'm not going anywhere." The next few days were a blur of medical examinations, police reports, and visits from company representatives. Maria came personally, expressing relief at my survival and assuring me my job was secure once I recovered. I thanked her but said we'd need to talk about some changes when I was back on my feet. The doctors were baffled by my condition. "By all rights, with these injuries and 5 days in the desert, you should be in much worse shape," my primary physician commented, reviewing my charts. "The broken bones are already showing signs of healing. There's no infection in your wounds, and your overall health is remarkably good. Whatever first aid you received out there probably saved your life." I just nodded, knowing they wouldn't understand if I tried to explain about Esmeralda's herbal medicines, her healing hands, the ritual by the fire. Some experiences can't be translated into medical terminology. On my third day in the hospital, a package arrived. No return address, no note, just my name written in an elegant flowing script I didn't recognize. Inside was a small glass bottle containing what looked like desert sand, and a dream catcher woven with colorful threads and tiny silver ornaments that looked remarkably like the ones Esmeralda had worn in her hair. Kelly was with me when I opened it. "Who's it from?" she asked curiously. I smiled, running my fingers over the intricate weaving. "A friend I met on the road." "Must be some friend," she observed. "What's with the sand?" "It's a reminder," I said, placing the bottle on my bedside table where I could see it, "of where I've been and where I'm going." 6 weeks later, with my leg healing well and a new perspective firmly in place, I made some decisions. I didn't quit trucking. The road was too much a part of me for that, but I did change how I approached it. I switched to regional routes that kept me closer to home, allowing me to spend weekends with Kelly. I bought a small house in Albuquerque, where she was finishing college, and for the first time in decades, I began to create a real home. On my first haul after recovery, I took Route 66 again, passing the spot where I'd gone off the road. I pulled over at a small turnout and stood for a while, looking down into the ravine where the wreckage of my truck had long since been removed. As I turned to leave, I noticed a roadside stand a few hundred yards ahead that I could have sworn wasn't there before. An old Native American man sat behind a counter displaying handmade crafts. My heart raced as I approached, but it wasn't the same man who had given me the medicine pouch, just another desert entrepreneur catering to Route 66 nostalgia seekers. Still, as I browsed his wares, I noticed a small dream catcher identical to the one I'd received in the hospital. When I asked its price, the old man smiled. "For you, no charge," he said. "A gift from a mutual friend." "Esmeralda?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. He nodded. "She said to tell you that the road always leads home, if you know how to read the signs." I left with the dream catcher hanging from my rear-view mirror alongside St. Christopher and the leather pouch. 3 protectors for a man who had learned that the greatest journeys aren't measured in miles, but in how far your heart travels. Now, whenever I drive that stretch of Route 66, I watch for a hidden camp, or a roadside stand, or a woman with wild hair and knowing eyes. I haven't seen her again, but sometimes, when the desert wind blows just right and the setting sun turns the landscape to gold, I can almost hear her voice on the breeze, and I know, with a certainty that defies explanation, that she's still out there, watching over lost travelers, helping them find their way back to themselves. Because that's the real magic of Route 66, not the tourist attractions or the historic markers, but the way it changes those who travel it with open hearts. The Mother Road doesn't just connect east and west, it connects who we were with who we might become. That's the elixir I brought back from my journey, the understanding that sometimes you have to get lost to find your way home.